Welcome to Deer Talk Now. I'm Brad Rooks with my co-host Brian Lovett. Dan Schmidt is left the building. It's peak of the rut. Dan's in Wyoming. He's going to return shortly. He's going to give us a call in. Shot a great big buck. I don't want to steal his thunder, so I'm not going to say much about it. Like I said, the rut is in the peak. We're up here in the Midwest. There's every place in the world I want to be in the woods, but here I sit at this desk to bring you the show live. A couple deals that we got going on. I want to mention a few things from the Shop Deer store. We have, Dan had mentioned a Terra Lux flashlight before. It's got a 1,000 lume light. It's a great flashlight. It's expensive. It's like $200, but he swears by the thing. It's rechargeable. Be sure to check out the website. There it is. It's a great, great product. I think you'll absolutely love it. I know Dan was wild about it. He actually has used it on his first hunt in Buffalo County. The outfitter was highly impressed. Oh, and I bet you this is Dan Schmidt. This has to be Dan the Killer Schmidt.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How about yourself, Dan?
Awesome. The rut is going on here in Wyoming.
Well, tell us about the hunt.
Wow, it's fantastic. You know, I flew out here Sunday, as you guys know, and, you know, Charlie nailed it with his rut predictions this year in the calendar, I think. I mean, when we left and when we were all talking about it before we left, there was just a little bit of chasing starting. We got here Sunday, and it was the same kind of thing, but it just kind of exploded. First day, I mean, there was big bucks chasing does everywhere, and you know, we're in the Black Hills, but it's the very western edge of the Black Hills. And what's so cool about that is you have mule deer, you have elk, you have whitetails. You have Miriam's turkeys, Brian. It is really cool that you could see all these different animals. But, you know, these bucks were moving, and what they said is we're going to spot and stalk in the mornings, which we did, and we saw some nice deer. But we, you know, you're 4 or 5. It's so different than hunting at home, 400 or 500, 600 yards away from these deer. So they said what we're going to do is we're going to sit in box blinds midday, which is kind of interesting for me. They dropped me off at 10:30, and I look up just shortly after noon. I had been texting with Brian back and forth just to see how things were going, and I look up, and there's this giant 150 class 10-pointer making a scrape right in front of me, you know, 140 yards across this. Well, I don't want to call it a field; it was grassy area, and I shot him right as he was making a scrape. It was really, really cool.
Nice. How are the rest of the guys doing in camp? Anybody else harvesting a deer?
We all tagged out. It's been we've had 10 hunters in camp, and what's really neat about it, you know, it's rifle hunting here during the rut. So you know, you're shooting 270s, you're shooting 30-06s, but within 2 days, everybody saw a good buck. You know, 140 inches or better, chasing does, working scrapes. It's been kind of dry, so they've been coming to some water tanks that are out in this cattle country, and we went 10 for 10 on some really nice bucks, and it's really cool because it's western whitetails. You got them intermingling with those big muleys, and there's no crosses though. I found that interesting. There's no. Sometimes you see those species intermingle, and you'll see interbreeding, but they don't have too much of that here. So it's either one side of the canyon is all whitetails, or one side of the canyon is all muleys, and a lot of nice typical genetics, a lot of nice 5x5s, some big 4x4s, and one guy shot one that had a drop time, which was pretty cool.
Nice. Was your deer the biggest one, or is it right up there with him?
I'd say it was right up there with him.
Really?
He's really wide. I didn't put a tape to him or anything. I'd say he's probably 20 inches wide. Probably the biggest, if not one of the top 2 or 3 that was shot. But everybody shot a really nice buck. We're hunting with Ralph Dampman and Trophy Ridge Outfitters. It's really, if everybody wants to see photos of some of these deer, go to trophyridgeoutfitters.com. Just an awesome place, really nice deer, great camp, 300,000 acres he has, which blows my mind. You know, we back home we talk in terms of 40 acres and 50 acres. He's got 300,000 acres that he leases.
Wow.
Just for hunting.
No.
So it's a pretty different experience.
What's the property like that you're on, Dan? You mentioned some canyons and I mean a lot of Pine Ridge and stuff like that.
Exactly. What's interesting about that, Brian, is it's and you've hunted the Black Hills, so you know this. It's a lot of that ponderosa pine and it's it's canyons and ridges. I call them ridges. They're kind of like almost like draws. But then when you get farther west, you get into some of that prairie area and some of that flatter country. And you wouldn't think a whitetail would be there, but there are whitetails there, and they're just out in sage and stuff like that. But it's a very I shot my buck in the shadow of Devil's Tower.
Sweet.
So it's some really cool terrain there, some rock outcroppings that you don't see just anywhere. It's this kind of part of the Wyoming that where you see that, and even if you get into South Dakota, you're going to see that as well.
Dan, I know you're with Kevin Howard on an industry hunt, but you're shooting a new Browning, correct? How'd you like that thing?
Yeah, Browning X-Bolt, an .6, and we were shooting those Winchester ballistic tips. That's the first time I've shot a ballistic tip in a whitetail, if you can believe that. And you talk about incredible bullet performance. I mean, it's that thing, as you know, that bullet is designed to dump all that energy into the whitetail, and that's exactly what it did. That deer basically, when I shot, the guns are so incredibly accurate. I felt confident with that thing way out to 300 yards, which, being a Midwestern, upper Midwestern hunter, that we're not normally used to shooting like that. But all perfect bullet performance. We had the Bushnell Legend scopes on there, so we had the multi-reticle scope, so we would have been good out to, mine was 145 yards, I think. We would have been way good out to 300, no problem. Just really good performance on that gear.
Wow. Well, congrats. We're going to let you go because Don Higgins is going to be calling in shortly, so congrats. When are you back in the office?
I'll be back. I'm flying home tomorrow morning, and I'll be back in the office on Friday, so we don't have really good cell service. I can text but can't send photos. Everybody wants to see more photos. I'll have photos up on the Deer and Deer Hunting site Friday morning.
All right. Sounds good. See you then.
All right. Have a good show, guys.
Yep.
Congratulations, Dan.
Thanks, man.
What a great deer. Man, he's had a horseshoe up his butt, I got to be honest with you, for the last year, 2 years. He's been killing deer wherever he goes.
I'll tell you, that is a beautiful deer, and it sounds like a cool hunt, too, in that western terrain. You've been out in those areas like that, and it's just a totally different experience from growing up here in the Midwest and hunting little wood lots and agricultural fields and things like that.
Absolutely. It is fun. When he told me about that hunt, I was hoping we were going to film it for Destination Whitetail, which is on tonight. But for whatever reason, we didn't have a chance. The cameraman wasn't along with him, but it would have been a great slam dunk, experience there. Before Don calls in, I'm going to plug a few other things that we're doing in the Shop Deer store. Can cookers right here. Can cooker, we only have 24 of these babies left, to be honest with you. Wow. If you order now, you get the free grate in the middle. If you're not familiar with it, it's a pressure cooker. Basically, you unsnap the top, you can load up all your food, you put the vegetables in, the last thing you put in is your meat, put it on any kind of heat source, either your gas grill, your stove inside, open fire, doesn't really matter. Within an hour, that food's going to be done. You pour it out. It is a great little product. I saw it at the ATA a couple of years ago, which is the Archery Trade Show. And this could be Don. Boy, we're not even have to talk today. This is great. Hello, is this Don?
This is Don.
Hey, Don, this is Brad.
How's it going, Brad?
Good. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
Hey, I didn't get a chance to really give you a great introduction to the show. Do you want to tell the folks exactly a little bit about your, who you are and what makes you popular, other than just killing all the big whitetails that we know about?
Well, I guess to start with, I'm an outdoor writer. I've been writing for a variety of magazines since the mid-1990s. I've authored a couple of books. In fact, my second book just came out about a week ago. And I do some habitat consultations, travel around the Midwest doing that, and also own a tree nursery where we grow a lot of the trees that we use on these conservation projects. So you can see I've got my hand in a lot of different things.
Yeah, and I've been a fan of your writing for many years. Your real specialty, I would say, is habitat management and being able to manipulate your own land into a format that's much more huntable than what it currently is, or to be able to generate more mature bucks than what your capacity was in the past. And, that stuff, according to me, it's right up my alley. I love this stuff. I love being able to do that. And that's what makes whitetail hunting so much fun.
Yeah, well, thank you. The habitat work's actually kind of become a passion of mine that I enjoy as much as the deer hunting itself. So I was fortunate and blessed, really to be able to turn that into a career, and it became so successful. My wife was even able to quit her job and help me. So,
wow,
it's a dream come true.
Outstanding. Hey, Don, it's Brian Lovett.
Hi, Brian.
How are you doing?
Good.
Just wanted to ask you, how long have you been into habitat management? I mean, did it kind of start with the modern trend, or had you been doing a lot of it, owning a nursery for years before that?
Well, I actually just kind of fell into it. I bought my grandparents' farm when they passed away. It's just a small farm, and we'd raised beef cattle at the time, and I had an opportunity to sign up some of the acreage for CRP, and I could make more money doing that than I could raising the cattle, and it just made perfect sense. And I was already an addicted whitetail hunter anyway, so I decided to take that cattle farm and turn it into the deer habitat.
Now, how many
Just
years
kind of grew from there.
Yeah, having a cattle farm, and if people are not familiar with that, I'm sure you're running beef cattle in the pasture, and those things eat basically everything. I mean, it's vacant of all the shrubs, vacant of anything. How long did it take you to get that property back into good quality deer habitat?
Yeah, it was actually a pretty quick process, and when I started, I'm not in an area that has a whole lot of deer. I'm kind of out in an agricultural prairie, and I thought when I started, if I could get to the point where on a hunt I might see 5 or 6 deer occasionally, that'd really be something. And I've got to the point where now in the wintertime I'll have 50 or more deer wintering on my property, and I've had a number of hunts where I've seen more than 10 different bucks on a hunt, and I think the most I've ever seen here is 17 different bucks on one hunt. But it actually happened pretty quick. Once we got the cattle off of the place, I would say within 2 or 3 years, the deer had pretty much found a home, and then they just kind of multiplied from there. And each year it just became better and better than it was the year before.
Now, at the same time you were doing that, were you also starting to practice like selective harvest, selecting more mature bucks instead of passing up younger deer?
Well, I've always wanted to be a trophy hunter since I was a kid. Actually, it started. I killed my first buck when I was 16 back in 1979. And, I was a trophy hunter basically from the word go, because after I killed that first buck, I wanted my second one to be bigger. And I think one of the things that made me so successful in the end was that I wasn't willing to sacrifice my goal towards the end of the season. If a lesser buck came along, I'd hold on to that tag, and eat tag soup that winter rather than shoot a buck that wasn't up to my standards. And that really just gave me a lot more time in the field. And, it just, the experience just added up over the years and made me a lot better hunter.
Yeah. It's interesting there, because I was the same way. I mean, it used to kill me to have a tag in my pocket, and now I'd rather kill a big deer or eat that tag. I mean, there's plenty of antlerless deer out there in the world for me to harvest, and I'm going to do my share on that. And if I don't get a mature whitetail, I don't get a mature whitetail. I can live with not shooting a big buck, but it's hard. Let's talk a minute about your book, Don. You sent it. I did not, literally, I stole this off of Dan Schmidt's desk. I know this one was mine because it's signed. I want to thank you for it. Identifiable names. You got Mark Anthony, Adam Hayes, Roger Raythor, the Wenzel brothers, Bobby Worthington. Give us a little premises. What made you think about doing this book and what it's about?
Well, I published my first book back in 2005, and when we did that, my wife and I talked it over, and we wasn't even sure, this was going to be profitable or anything, and we finally decided to go for it, and we figured after that, we printed 2,500 books, and we figured we had to sell the first 500 to pay for the printing. Well, we sold the first 2,500 in no time and had to do a second printing. And it just seemed that a lot of people related to it because, I wasn't trying to make myself out as an expert or anything. I was just relating what I seen in the woods. And shortly after that book came out, I was getting requests for a second book and people wanting to know when the second book was coming out. But I never really felt like I had enough information to justify a second book. And it's kind of like with my magazine articles. I feel like if I don't have something important to say or a different angle on a topic, then I just don't want to put an article out to be putting articles out.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have enough material on my own for a second book, but I knew enough guys that were very successful and also very ethical that had plenty to say, and I just came up with the idea, you know, why not let each guy write 2 or 3 chapters and compile them together in one book? And that's what I did. But you know, there's a lot of people that I could have chose from to be in the book, that, and justifiably so, that are very knowledgeable about whitetail hunting. But I went a little bit farther, and I made sure that the guys that I selected were also very ethical and good ambassadors for the sport of deer hunting. And that surely doesn't mean that they're the only ones that are, but they were ones that I knew on a personal level that I could approach about the book. And so I guess that's how it came to be.
It's a great looking book, and before, you know, how this works is we got a pile of questions. I mean, a pile of questions. We're never going to get through them all, but there's one other product that I know you're involved with, and I want to give you a chance to talk about a little bit, and that's your real world wildlife seed. You know, before, when you were first coming out with it, I'd read about it already over the internet, because it's kind of funny how some of this stuff just takes off. The one that I was really interested in was your wildlife soybeans, because you know, I think the people that are going after the grays, the big leafy soybeans, are chasing the wrong thing. I mean, I plant regular agricultural soybeans, and I always have enough foliage. You know what I mean? I always have enough foliage. I don't have to worry about big leafy leaves. So,
well, the way the whole seed company came about was through my habitat work. I've always desired to have the very best habitat possible. I mean, everything I do related to deer hunting, I do it the best I possibly can. I mean, I want to have the best bow in my hand. I want to have, you know, the best property, the best, you name it. All my equipment's the best, trail cameras, right on down the line. And I wanted my food plots to be top of the line. And I was working with a video group producing videos, and it kind of came to me, hey, on our next video, what we ought to do is contact all these food plot seed companies and get them all to donate, you know, a bag of their seed, and we'll plant it all side by side by side in a checkerboard-like pattern in a field, and we'll just let the deer tell us which is the best. We'll video over it as we hunt over it, and, you know, we'll incorporate that as part of the hunting video. And at the same time, you know, we're educating the viewer, but we're also educating ourselves so that we can have the best food plot seed on our properties. So we started contacting these companies, and what we found was they were all willing to send us free seed, but nobody would send us free seed if we was going to plant it next to a competitor's.
yeah.
And kind of a light bulb went off. You're like, you know, if they're confident in their product, they ought to be able to put it right next to the competitor. And you mentioned soybeans, and soybeans are by far my favorite food plot.
Me too.
And but one you know, one problem I'd always had with soybeans was a lot of times in the late season those pods will shatter open and drop the soybeans onto the ground. And for years I'd just been getting soybean seed from my neighbors who are farmers and putting that in my plots. And some years it worked fine, but a lot of years the seeds would shatter and drop the beans onto the ground in the mud or snow or whatever. So what we did when we started the whole food plot seed company was we got our hands on every variety of soybeans we possibly could and tested them side by side by side. And we just observed them for shatter, but we was doing our observations in March, you know, after those beans had stood for the entire winter. There's a lot of ag soybeans that are tested for shatter resistance, you know, because it's important for the farmer to be able to harvest that crop. And if they're shattered and laying on the ground, they can't. So, you know, it's of interest to farmers as well. But the thing of it is, those agriculture beans are tested for shatter resistance in the fall. And as deer hunters, we need those beans to be in the pod during the winter. So we tested every variety we could get our hands on, and the 3 that we found that had the best shatter resistance, we incorporated into a blend. And that's how we came about. That was our first product, actually, that we ever released. And it's just kind of grown from there.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Those, if you haven't had, you know, planted beans in the past, it's a great food source early in the season, and then when the leaves defoliate, you know, the deer kind of leave them alone for a while. But man, at the end of December, you can't get better than standing soybeans. I mean,
I'm telling you. And you know, I mentioned earlier that I had a hunt where I'd seen 17 different bucks on the same hunt. Actually, all 17 of those bucks were standing in a soybean food plot at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was during a brutal spell in early January.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's high in protein. I mean, that's the other thing. It's a great food source for those whitetails.
Right.
A lot of people have corn and it's carbohydrates, and yeah, it's going to keep that deer alive, but it's really not doing anything to build up their body or muscle mass. So
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
It's a lot better to go on. So let's start off with some questions. I'm going to let Brian Lovett ask the first one, and then we're going to give you a rapid fire through here. Okay?
Okay, sounds great.
All right, Don, this one is from Scott Fassbender in Wisconsin. And Scott asks, what's the biggest difference you see when hunting mature 4.5-year-old plus whitetails compared to younger bucks?
Well, probably the first thing is there's a whole lot less of them. For every 4.5-year-old buck, there's probably 3 times as many 3.5-year-olds. And then you can just go right on down the line, and they're just such a rare animal to begin with in most places, unless you've got a large private property that's tightly controlled. So that's the first thing, is just having a 4.5-year-old buck around to be able to hunt him. And then the other thing is how they use the wind. I mean, if a big buck just won't move hardly unless he's got the wind at his advantage, and if you don't understand how to play the wind, then you're not going to get a crack at him. So I think just having one around to begin with, and then how that buck relates to the wind is probably the other big difference.
Yeah, I would agree. Hey, we got a question kind of on that same front. It was from Andy Phelps, and he has said, it's long. He said he hunts out of basically public land, but his biggest problem is how does he locate where the big buck is to harvest them? So how do you go about in finding, the mature whitetails on your property, I guess is what he's asking.
Well, I hunt a lot more than just my own property. I've got a lot of places I hunt just simply by knocking on doors and asking permission. So I can relate to this question real well. And like right now, I've probably got permission for 8 or 10 properties, but I'm not hunting them all because some of them don't have big bucks on them. And the best way I've found to locate big bucks is with a trail camera. Yeah. And this time of the year, just go out and find a scrape that's being hit hard and put a camera on it, and you'll get a picture of every buck in that area. Now, once the rut heats up, and the bigger bucks are with the does, it's kind of tougher. But, if you start in October and find a good scrape or make them a good mock scrape and put a trail camera on it, it won't take long till you'll have a picture of every buck in the area.
I 100% agree. I'm huge on mock scrapes. My favorite time is in October.
Yep.
And I can even relate to not having a mature buck on your property. That is, in my case, my personal farm this year. I do not have a buck that's on there that I want to kill. So it's kind of funny how that all worked out, but
yep.
It's a case of life.
All right, Don, this question is from Brian Thurm in Iowa. And Brian asks, is it true the bigger the tree, the bigger the buck that is rubbing the tree? He would think that any size buck could rub a larger tree. What's your experience?
Well, in my experience, a big buck will rub all sizes of trees, big and little, but a small buck will generally pick on smaller trees. If you've got a tree 6 inches in diameter or bigger, you can just about bet that's a big buck. So you don't see too many forkhorns rubbing on trees 6 inches and bigger. So, a big rub's one thing that really gets me excited, and the bigger the better. Especially,
little bucks may hit that rub once it's open.
Right.
In my experience, but to open that big rub, normally have a mature whitetail, and I can
agree 100% of that.
Yeah, and on my farm again, case in point, I have no big rubs this year. So there you go.
Yep.
This question is from Brian Emerson out of Wisconsin. He says, "Thank you for taking time to talk to Deer Talk Now." He has 2 questions. He says his time is extremely limited to be out in the woods. What are 1 or 2 things you would say to someone like me to help me stay in the game of shooting the best deer I can? And his second question is, when talking to people, what are the 1 or 2 biggest mistakes you see people making when hunting big deer?
Well, as far as timing, if you're limited on time, say a guy's only got 1 week of vacation a year, I've been preaching for a long time that from November 5th to the 12th is probably the best 7-day period there is, which we're right in the middle of right now, actually. And another good point or time is right around Thanksgiving weekend. I found, towards the end of the rut, around Thanksgiving, when the hot does are becoming more and more scarce, big buck's on his feet a whole lot more looking for the last one or the next one. And there was a string of like 5 years in a row where the biggest buck I seen from a tree stand during each of those 5 years was during Thanksgiving weekend. And every one of those bucks was on his feet looking for a doe, not with a doe, but he was on his feet searching. So there's something about that period right there at the end of November that if you a lot of people are off work Thanksgiving weekend, so if you're pressed for time or can't get time off from your job, don't give up just because you think the peak of the rut's over. That's a prime time. And if you've only got 1 week of vacation to take, consider getting as many days as possible between the 5th and the 12th. And the second question was the mistakes people make on mature bucks, is that right?
Yes, correct. 2 of the biggest mistakes.
Well, as I alluded to earlier, not learning how mature bucks use the wind as they travel. The wind is key. If you're just going out there and looking for sign and throwing up your stand over the sign, you're not going to kill a whole lot of mature bucks. You need to understand, you need to have a total plan in place or an idea of where that buck's at right now, where he's going to be going, and how he's going to utilize the wind to get from point A to point B. And when you throw all those things together and come up with an educated plan, then you can start doing it consistently. And probably the other mistake people make is they're not hunting where the mature bucks are spending their daylight hours. They're hunting sign instead.
Yeah.
After the sun goes down, a buck can cover miles, leaving tracks and scrapes and trail cam photos and rubs and whatever. But when the sun comes up, he's got a safe place where he likes to be, and that's where he's at. And if that's not on your property, your odds of killing him have went down considerably.
Yeah. What time? I know you tagged out this year early in the season. Do you like that early season as well? For taking a mature whitetail.
Well, the buck I shot this year on October 5th was the earliest I've ever shot a good buck, and it can be a good time. My favorite time is the late season, because if you can get a good food source like a field of standing soybeans, you can draw deer from a long ways off, and the worse the weather, the better it gets. Yeah. Because it'll get them bucks on their feet, every afternoon and head to that food, and they're real predictable. During the rut, a friend of mine once said that you can kill a buck from any tree in the woods if you're there on the right day. But during the late season, you can do it on purpose. You can, come up with a plan and execute it year after year after year.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, early season's great if you have a big one and he's patternable on a food source. But other than that, that late season, they're going to be on your feet hitting the food source. So if you have the food, they're going to come.
Mm-hmm. All right, Don, we've got a great habitat question here from Alvy Miller in Illinois. And Alvy says, please talk about the role warm season native grasses play in the attempt to hold deer on your property versus deer going on your neighbor's property.
Well, I'm real big on native grasses, and in fact, Real World Wildlife Seed Company has a special blend called Bedding in a Bag that we've created just for whitetail bedding cover. One of the best things about them is you can establish bedding cover, within 2 years. It's not like planting trees or brush or something where you've got to wait several years for it to get big enough to hide deer. These native grasses, a lot of times the first year you plant it, by fall, you've got enough cover you can hold bedded deer. And what I found on my property is that deer actually prefer to bed in those grasses than they do wooded cover. And, I don't know if it's more comfortable for them or they just feel more secure in there because it's so dense and everything or what. But, the first time I ever planted native grasses, I planted a 5-acre patch. And the very first evening that I hunted over it that fall, I watched 5 bucks walk out of it. And so I was convinced from day one, and I've just been planting more and more. And there's something to that. They love to bed in that grass.
I agree. It can be a learning experience because, when that craze kind of took over, I'll go back 10 years, I was going to jump on the wagon, and only I didn't do my research well enough. And, I planted all the big blue stem, the stuff that's, 8 foot tall or whatever it gets. And that winter it all crumpled. I'm like, what the world? What did I do wrong? And then somebody informed me you should, have several different blends in that, correct? And that's what I'm sure your bedding in a bag does. It has the 2 foot stuff that holds up to 4, the 4 that holds up to 6, and so on. And that's what really makes it more of a viable bedding area. Is that correct, Don, or not?
Well, the thing of it is, there's like each species has several varieties within the species. For instance, switchgrass. There's probably at least a dozen varieties of switchgrass, and same way as big blue stem and Indian grass. There's numerous varieties of each of those. And what we did was we tested every variety that we could get our hands on, and we tested them for standability in the winter, so that when they encounter snow and wind and ice and things like that, we want the ones that are going to stand or at least spring back up. And that's pretty much tied to variety as much as anything. So our blend includes Indian grass, big blue stem, and switchgrass, but it's the specific varieties in the blend that sets it apart from others.
Okay. Interesting. Hey, this one's kind of on that same format for a question. It's from Dwayne Hopkins out of Illinois. It says, Don, you emphasize the importance of the sanctuary and what you can use to create one. What size of area do you need to do this, and how long does it take to establish one of these areas?
I like for a sanctuary to be as big as practical on a property. In fact, on my property, it's 120 acres. Every one of my stands is within 20 yards of the edge of the cover. The heart of the property I leave to the deer. It's basically their sanctuary. And when I walk across an open field and right into the cover, my scent is always blowing out, across the open field. So those deer, if they do encounter me, it's around the edge of the property, and they don't ever smell me because my scent's never blowing in, at least while I'm hunting. Now, if I'm out working, that's a different story. But, a sanctuary is the key. Like I was, the other question, what's the biggest mistake people make is not hunting on a property where a mature buck spends his daylight hours. Well, you can make those deer stay on your property by just giving them security. And security, more than anything, means freedom of human intrusion. Mm-hmm. We've all seen state parks and things like that that are just absolutely loaded with deer that nothing special has been done to the habitat. And it's the freedom of human intrusion that makes that property special to the deer, in their eyes anyway. So, on a sanctuary, I like for them to be as big as possible, but at the same time, I like for them to be as thick as possible, too, because mature bucks especially like thick cover to bed in. So if you can combine the two, a large area free of human intrusion, and then make it as thick as possible, you're going to have some mature deer on your property if there's any in the area.
I agree. There's a couple other things that you can do if you can get a water source within that sanctuary. I mean, now you got another one of the prerequisites in there.
Right.
And even one of the food plots we plant is basically inside my sanctuary. We never hunt it. We just leave it for the deer, so they feel totally safe. We put a camera on it, but we don't really check that camera until after the season's over. So.
Right.
All right, Don, here's a hot button question from Tim Walmsley in Illinois.
Uh-oh.
And he's asking, how do you feel the current Illinois Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Division has done with the state's deer management when it comes to having mature whitetail bucks in the herd, as compared to, say, 20 years ago under the then Illinois Department of Conservation?
Well, I think the current DNR, and actually going back for a few years, has made it very clear they don't care at all about mature deer. In fact, for a number of years, I was a director for the Illinois Bowhunters Society and was privileged to sit in meetings with DNR personnel and meet with legislators and things like that, and actually even testify in front of legislators and various committees. Ironically, I testified in one where Barack Obama, state senator at the time, was part of the committee that I testified in front of. But to get back to the question, Illinois DNR does not care about mature deer. In fact, I sat in a meeting where John Buehner-Kempe from the DNR came and visited with the Illinois Bowhunter Society Board of Directors in Decatur, Illinois. And John said specifically that the Illinois DNR looks at the deer herd as a number. At the end of the summer, there's X number of deer in the herd, and they want to have that number down to X number or Y number at the end of the year. And he specifically said they don't care which deer in the herd are killed or how they're killed. They don't care if it's a fawn or a mature buck or if it's killed with a bow, a gun, or what. They just want the number they start with whittled down to another number and that's all they're looking at. And in fact, you know, to give the listeners a little bit of history, the Illinois deer herd, you know, modern hunting seasons basically started in the 1950s, you know, after the whitetails were wiped out early in the century. And Illinois had a couple of pioneer biologists, Forrest Loomis and Jack Calhoun were a couple of them, that things like either sex seasons actually started with those guys in Illinois. Micromanaging by counties actually started with those guys in Illinois. And, you know, they were just using their own logic, but they were way ahead of the game. And you know, a lot of states copied some of the things that were started by those guys in Illinois. But, you know, eventually politics, and Illinois is kind of known for dirty politics took over. And when the current deer biologist was hired, he was basically a waterfowl biologist from Tennessee, I believe it was. And he basically was hired because he was doing an excellent job with computer models with the waterfowl in Tennessee. And so they hired him for Illinois, and he came here doing the same thing. His whitetail, I'm not saying he don't have whitetail knowledge, but he was trying to use computer models, not taking into account things like sex ratios and age structure as he set regulations. And, you know, at the time he took over, Illinois was at the top of the whitetail world. It was second to nobody. I mean, Iowa looked up to Illinois at that point. And sadly, you know, Illinois could be at the top of the world again with just a few tweaks to some regulations. But the politics in Illinois just refused to let that happen. And Illinois is on a downhill slide. And the hunters in Illinois that live here that are in the know, they realize that there's absolutely no doubt. You know, we talked about the consulting work I've done, and I'm all over the state of Illinois as well as the Midwest. But in particular, I've done a lot of work in Pike County. And in my opinion, Pike County is the most overrated place on earth to hunt deer. In fact, I've got open invitations to properties on Pike County that I've done work on that, you know, I won't even go visit them. And I can hunt there anytime I want for nothing because it's just a wreck over there. The outfitting business has come in and leased up everything, you know, in the county and in the area. And just total mismanagement. They've sold the deer herd out to make $1 on it. And so to get back to Tim's question, Illinois does not manage for mature bucks at all. They don't care if we have one or not.
Yeah, I think a lot of DNRs are like that. I mean, even in Wisconsin, you know, I don't think they're doing a bad job, but they're trying to manage the herd itself. They don't care if they're mature whitetail bucks or if they're 1.5 year olds. They really don't.
Right, managing for quotas and numbers. And
yeah,
stuff,
that's the way it is. What's interesting about the whitetails in nature, you know, as more and more people become managers of their own herd, of their own farms, I mean, that's when you really start paying the detail. You know, you're trying to grow these mature whitetails, and when you get one on your property, you're proud of it, but you're trying to hold all those 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds on your place. And when you do that, I mean, the quantity of bucks that you harvest is a lot lower, but they're still there. So it's kind of interesting. 10 years ago, the management techniques that the DNRs were using is totally different than what they probably should be right now. You know, so it's interesting. Hey, here's a question from Bob Olsons. It says, what are your thoughts on direct seeding? I'm leaving a farm for my 3 nephews. The oldest is 10, and I was thinking of planting a stand of white oaks in a few spots and a stand of black walnuts. What are your thoughts?
Well, direct seeding with trees, I'm assuming he's meaning with acorns for trees.
Yes.
I haven't had a whole lot of luck with it. I much prefer to start with potted trees that are, you know, grown in a 3-gallon pot and get some size on them and put them out. I think you just, in the end, for the effort you put forth and the years you invest in, I think you're a lot further ahead. Now, if I was going to do any direct seeding, there's a variety of ways to do it. A lot of folks will just go out and scatter the acorns on the ground and then run a disc over it, you know, to kind of cover them up and disc them in. And that's a pretty poor way to do it, in my opinion. If I was going to do it, I would go out and just plant the individual acorns, and then I would take one of these plastic tree tube shelters that, you know, most people have seen, and stake one of those shelters right over that seed that you just planted, and then you got a chance. But you know, the deer browse pressure is so high. There's a lot of species, like white oaks in particular, that they grow so slow when they're small that the deer are browsing them off just as soon as they sprout. And there's regions where there's hardly any young white oak trees because of that.
Mm-hmm. You'd mentioned tree tubes. You know, tell everybody, when you first plant your first batch of trees, you know, you look at it as a huge expense. I mean, anybody does it if they're not familiar with the tubes. But the minute you put tubes on your trees and see the difference, I mean, it's amazing what they can do.
Yeah, it really is. And we actually sell both trees and the tree tube shelters. And I tell people all the time, don't look at how many trees you can get for your money and get the maximum number of trees you can get. Look at how many tubes you can buy, and that's how many seedlings you should get, because you could go out and plant 100 seedlings, and 2 years down the road, you know, if you don't tube them, you might have 2 or 3 left.
Mm-hmm.
But if you plant 100 or plant 50 seedlings, plant half as many, but put tubes on them, you know, you should have 45 to 50 of them left and thriving. And those tubes not only protect them from the deer to browsing them, but they actually stimulate the growth of the tree. It's like a mini greenhouse inside that tube. And it'll cause them to grow, you know, 3 times faster than they would normally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tested that firsthand. I planted some with tubes and without, and I even protected them. And the ones that were in the tubes probably grew on average within 3 years, I'd say 3 to 5 feet taller than the other trees without tubes. Wow. I mean, it's pretty amazing stuff. So.
All right, Don, this is from Bill Bird in Alabama, and he's asking, how well do mineral blocks work? And do you have any suggestions on how to use them?
Well, in my state of Illinois, you're not allowed to use minerals, so I don't know that I can answer that question. I do have a small herd of captive deer that I've had for about 20 years that basically I do research and stuff. You know, I got them to learn more about whitetails. And so I do give those deer mineral. And I can tell you one thing for absolute certain is calcium and phosphorus needs to be in a 2-to-1 ratio. Twice as much calcium as phosphorus. And if someone's going to buy mineral, don't look at the fancy packaging or the advertising program or what your buddy recommends or anything. Turn around that package and read the label and look at the percentage of salt, but also look at the percentage of calcium and phosphorus. And you know, there's one, and I'm not going to mention any products by name, but there's one product that is very, very popular, a mineral product, that is like, you know, 80% salt and has no phosphorus at all. But you want to just turn that label around and look for twice as much calcium as there is phosphorus and a lower quantity of salt in the mix.
Yeah, oftentimes those people that are buying that mix are misled, because salt, you know, the deer are going to crave salt in the hot weather. I mean, their body needs it. So if it's high in salt content, the deer are going to absolutely pound it. Unfortunately, other than, you know, helping the water intake, the salt is doing nothing. It's not giving them any of the important minerals or trace minerals that are required. So, I mean, that's what you really got to watch for.
Exactly. And if you just want to give them salt, just go to the feed store or the grocery store and just buy some rock salt and throw out. That's basically not much worse than a lot of the products that are being marketed to deer hunters as mineral.
Yeah, what's funny about that is we also have horses, which horses need salt in the summer as well. And in our horse pastures, we got salt blocks. And if you look when it's really hot, it gets the evening, sun just setting, there'll be a ton of whitetails at that salt block. So, you know, they're just coming to it no matter what.
Yep.
Here's a question that I have, and it's from Dave Ziegler. He's out of PA. It says, during and after a storm like Sandy or any kind of major storm with flooding, high winds, will the deer react the same afterwards? And how about changing the landscape with trees blown over and high water? How long does it take? How long would this take, or how long will this interfere with the rut?
Well, to be honest, I've never experienced that, so I'm not sure that I can answer it.
I can tell you this. We had a tornado come through one year in late, it would have been in late August, and man, it on a deer pattern movement wise, yeah, it really changed the way they're moving because they took one 40-acre parcel that we had and made it a bee's nest. You know, it was just miserable to get in and out of. And what it did is it created a new bedding area. From once was that something was clean, turned into pretty nasty bedding area. So, and just tell people, Don, what's your impact on a regular storm? Just, high pressure, low pressure, and deer movement.
Yeah, I go hunting anytime I can. I used to look at the moon phase and the solar tables and all that stuff and try to plan my hunts around them. And anymore, I go anytime I can. I do know that cold fronts are probably the number one thing that I've seen as far as increasing deer movement. So anytime there's a cold front, I try to go. Once we get into the late season, I watch the weather pretty, religiously, and if I see a winter storm coming, I know the deer right before that storm are going to be feeding heavily. So, 24, 48 hours before a major storm's going to hit, I'm spending as much time in the timber as possible. But, as far as getting really into the details, I don't that much.
Yeah. You're going out just like, I'm going to go out and bow hunt every day I possibly can. I don't care if it's drizzling outside or like you said, if the cold front's coming. Yeah, I might hunt in different spots based off the weather, but I'm definitely going to enjoy my time in the field.
Yep, that's me.
I'm the same exactly. Time for one last question. Brian, I'm going to let you fire it out.
All right, Don, this is from Gene McSherry in Wisconsin, and he's asking how much of a factor is predator control in trophy management?
It's interesting that I get this question because just this year, I never thought coyotes bothered the deer that much, but I've had two instances this year where I've seen, one's here on my property. The number of deer on my property is down significantly from what it's been in past years, and especially the number of fawns. But yet the number of coyotes has skyrocketed. I haven't went on a hunt on my property yet this year where I haven't seen coyotes, and sometimes 3 or 4 at a time. And I kind of attributed that to the coyotes, but I wasn't 100% sure. And then I've got another property I hunt that this summer when I was running trail cameras, the place was absolutely loaded with deer, just tracks everywhere. And I'm the only one allowed on the property, so I know there's no hunting pressure besides me. And I've only been hunting on it once, but I'm still running trail cameras. And I noticed that the trail cameras kind of went dead, and the day I hunted, I didn't see a single deer, and I wasn't even seeing the tracks on the field that I had been. And I wasn't sure what was going on with the property, but I knew something was up. Well, towards evening time on the one hunt I was there, the coyotes started popping out of the woods, and there was a pack of 6 coyotes in that wood. So I have absolutely no doubt now that coyote population will definitely affect the deer on a property. And, coyotes are just like deer. They want a place that's secluded where they're not going to get harassed by humans. So they're going to seek out the best cover they can find to meet their needs. And if that happens to be your deer property, well, you need to do something about it or it's going to affect your deer hunting for sure.
I am always amazed at how far away those whitetails can see a coyote coming or hear them or whatever. I mean, how many times have you been out in the field and you see a whitetail out in front of you and 400 yards away, it snaps its head away and it's looking towards that direction, and sure enough, there's a coyote. I mean, we're just hunting down in Missouri, and just like your farm, Don, every time I sat, I saw coyotes every single time. Wow. On the very last night of the hunt, a whole pack of them came down, and they started howling all the way around. I kept thinking of my 12-year-old son who thinks for whatever reason they're going to attack him. I was like, man, he wouldn't come out of the tree tonight. He'd be calling my cell phone. But and I never saw a whitetail that night, and I was trying to figure out as you're sitting in the tree stand, going, God, I wonder where they are. I wonder if they're just not moving. Well, when those coyotes moved in, there was no doubt in my mind those coyotes had pushed out the whitetails beforehand, and I was just hunting where they were. So. Yep. Unfortunately. I appreciate your time, Don. Anybody that hasn't checked you out should definitely visit your website. Do you want to give everybody that website address?
Sure. It's HigginsOutdoors.com. HIGGINS outdoors.com.
And there is a wealth of information there, and I think you'll have links to the Real World Wildlife Seed, correct? And you probably have some information on your book as well.
Yeah, there's a page dedicated to the wildlife seed that'll link them right to the wildlife seed page. I've also got a consulting page about my consulting business that has a pretty interesting video on it. And either one of my books can also be ordered directly from the site.
It amazes me how many people that think that, they've deer hunted all their life, but you as a consultant, I mean, I'm sure you've went to many of these properties, and as soon as you get in there, you have a million ideas of what the guy should be doing on that property, correct?
Yeah, each property is unique, and it's just real interesting to travel around the Midwest. And I refuse to go outside of my comfort zone. I'm not going to go to the deep south or to the north woods of northern Wisconsin or anything like that. I'm sticking to the farm country of the Midwest. But still, it's real interesting to meet the different individuals and see the different properties and see what they're doing and how you would change it. And then it's really rewarding when you get those pictures later, that they've just shot the biggest buck of their life and they give you credit for it. So that's pretty rewarding.
Nice. Well, anybody looking for any kind of whitetail information should definitely look up Don's website. I thank you for the call in, and best of luck the rest of the day. Probably you're going to spend some time in a tree stand, aren't you?
I'm headed that way right now.
Darn it. Everybody is. I'm jealous.
Yeah. I appreciate the opportunity, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What good information there. I mean, here you got a guy that's not only living a dream, but he's creating whitetail meccas, for other people. I love that.
Very interesting to hear about his background with the cattle farming and then how he turned that, into the whitetail management. And he obviously has just a ton of experience on all levels of management too, from not only trophy management, but the habitat manipulation and everything. So, I mean, it's just fascinating. I think we can all take lessons from Don's experience.
As a guy that has his own farm that really, I was doing food plots, but I wasn't really managing the habitat till about 5 years ago. It is a lot of fun. I mean, you can have fun with trying to create new bedding areas, and I tell everybody, they're like, some of this you're never going to see, and they're right. I'll probably never see, the fruits of all my efforts into what I've been doing. But I'm going to tell you this: my grandkids, and I don't have any right now. I hope to have them. They're going to have a whitetail mecca. I mean, it's designed, and as I'm designing it, it is to be able to harvest mature whitetails because you're creating the habitat because you know where they want to go, how they want to move, and you're creating that structure for them. But you're creating pinch points, funnels, everything else that you're going to be able to harvest them down the road when it all fulfills. So
putting all the pieces together. Right?
Absolutely. It's going to be very, very cool. Couple things that I didn't get a chance to mention on the Shop Deer side. We're doing a lunar calendar package, 40% discount on it. If you're not familiar, it's Charlie Alzheimer's rut predictions. It's going to tell you the exact when the rut's going to kick in. This is a 13 calendar. You're going to get a digital download, and I think they actually package the page-a-day calendar, which is a page a day gives whitetail fact every single day. It's great if you're in the office. It's good information. Here's the complete kit that you're going to get. It's 40% off. Great Christmas idea, great gift idea. I really like the page a day. I mean, some of the unique stuff that we have in there really it's pretty cool.
It lets you think about deer hunting all year round, pretty much.
Absolutely,
So.
and there's little things, and we didn't really, when we designed it and put it together, those tips aren't specific to the season, so you might get a little white, rut tip in the middle of summer that kind of gets you fired up.
Yeah.
If nothing else, it's pretty deer photos for 365 days a year.
Those always work.
The other thing is we have a huge book sale going on. I think it's 40% off any kind of book in the store. So it is a great deal. There's a number of different books out there. We just did a new book by Tom Miranda. We did another new book on with Legendary Whitetails that you're a huge part of. Well, you're part of both books. Both are very, very good books. If you want to give anybody insight on them, go ahead. I mean, that Tom Miranda book is the Whitetail Slam. He's the first guy to shoot all 29 species on video. And it is a nice, nice looking book.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, he was meticulous about filming all these big game hunts that he did. I mean, all 29 of the recognized North American big game species. And his still photography is also great. And it's also filled with just interesting facts about each of the animals itself. I mean, so if you're not familiar with a central barren ground caribou, for example, I mean, you can check into Tom's book and read all about it and then see, his hunt for that. And also, when you buy the book, link to our website through a link in the book, and see a clip of the hunt itself. So it's a pretty neat package.
Very cool. The last thing I want to mention before we sign off for the day is Destination Whitetail. It's on tonight. It's on Sportsman's Channel. It was for the third quarter, which for July, August, and September, the number 7 show on the network is what it will play. So it's getting great reviews. It's definitely a little bit different. It's more of a travel, more of a destination. It's not about the size of the whitetails. So we're not killing huge whitetails every place that we go. But it is really a unique look in the different destinations that we hunt whitetails in.
Yeah.
So visit that tonight. It's on at 7:30 Central Time, 8:30 Eastern Time. Re-aired at like 10:30 at night. Again, I think you're going to like it. If you don't get a chance to tune in to that, you can tune in to NBC, Deer and Deer Hunting. That's on at 7:30 in the mornings on Saturday mornings. Great show. It's been around for years, and it gives a lot of hardcore whitetail information. Till next week, I'm Brad Rooks. This is Brian Lovett. We'll see you next week. I'll be out because I'll be in Minnesota hunting, and Dan will be here. We're going to have Matt McPherson on the show, which if you guys are not familiar with Matt McPherson, he's from Matthews. He is the president, owner, guru, engineer, and he is going to have some great insight on their new bow, which looks very, very cool. So anyway, I'm not going to steal the thunder. The bow's out if you want to check the websites, but it is a really cool little bow. Talk to you next week.